Hello, my name is Ugonna and I am a student at the University of Westminster doing my Masters in Hematology. I and some colleagues of mine are preparing a vodcast on the importance of graphs. These graphs have been used to represent data in various fields. In science, in arts, people use graphs to try to pass across information. But in the last 20 years or so, with the evolving of computers, graphics, graphs have changed, and people are really interested in graphs. The pictures that graphs can show you are amazing. They make things simpler, and sometimes they make things complicated. Me and my colleagues have spoken to specialists in this field. We took some time to interview two prestigious individuals who are very interested in graphs and have been involved in graphs for the last 5 to 10 years. The first person we interviewed was Dr. Andrew Dalby, a senior lecturer at the University of Westminster, who teaches statistics and research. And we also interviewed Dr. Camila in Brazil, all the way in Brazil. She is a PhD psychology student at the University of Sao Paulo, and she is very interested in the water shortage in Brazil, and so she's been involved in looking at graphs and statistics that the Brazilian government have put out with regards to the water shortage. So I want you to sit back and view some of these interviews that we've had. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Guilherme Silva and get ready for some graphic content. So how long have you been aware of the power of graphs?
So everybody uses graphs, but I first sort of understood that it was very important to do graphs as well as you can when I was reading books by Howard Weiner and also seeing the ideas of David McCandless. So when I was in the Department of Statistics at Oxford, behind the professor's desk, there was a picture of the Monad map, which is one of the classic examples of a graph. And so I was getting into that and thinking about how should I represent data. I like box plots. So box plots are one of the things that, as soon as I saw it, I thought, why haven't I been using these forever? So I've been really getting into the depths of trying to understand how graphs work for probably about the last 5-6 years. Before that, I've been using graphs forever, but probably not as well as I could do.
In order to make everyone understand the data, what do you think is the best way to present it, and how to make it clear and transparent?
So for me, it has to be, if you're going to present a set of data, then you're sitting there and saying, well, I want somebody to be able to look at it, and do I want them to see it and be able to judge differences, or do I want them actually to be able to see a set of figures and a set of numbers? Now, if I want them to be able to see a set of figures and I want them to see a set of numbers, then it's really important that they can do that at a glance. So a good graph shouldn't be cluttered, it should be simple. You should use colour when you need to. If you're splitting between categories, then colour really is important. Doing graphs in different kinds of shadings and black and whites is never the best. I mean, you can have different textures, but ideally you need to use the right amount of colour, and you need to make sure that the thing you're representing is represented with the best kind of chart that you can do. So if you're representing a single number, then put a point to represent that single number. If you're representing a single number and its variation, then put the point and then put the whiskers on it representing its variation. If you want people to just glance at it and do a comparison, then you're looking at things which are going to be in height. So avoid anything that's complicated. Make everything as simple as possible.
And how do you think the quality of the graph can affect trust on the audience and or the general public?
So the problem is that a lot of people, so infographics have become very powerful tool, and they're used in the newspapers continuously. But there's a tendency to try and sensationalise. So there's a tendency to move towards, I'll do 3 dimensions and images, and I'll use caricatures, and I'll do other things, which make the graphs unnecessarily complicated. So instead of you being able to do the comparison and to have the message that you actually want to portray in the graph, then you've got to sit down and really think and find that message. And it becomes obscured by the details, by the way you presented it to make it gimmicky. So by turning things into images instead of regular areas, it's a lot harder to do. There are various ways of manipulating people into the way you look at the graph and at the data. Always, a person who creates a graph is going to have some kind of agenda or preferences, and they're not a completely objective representation. But most of the time, unless there's a direct political reason, people are not going to deliberately skew a graph or move a graph. For the general population, they're not going to be skeptical about something that's presented as data and that something's presented as a chart. And perhaps we should teach people to be much more skeptical than they are, because the media is there to present what you want to see and what they want to present to you. So there's a kind of feeding cycle. So at the minute we've just finished an Ebola outbreak, 8,000 people died, but in the same period of time probably 50 or 60,000 people died of flu. But you don't see any newspaper going, oh, today Aunt Edna died of flu. Yesterday Muriel died of flu. Last week Edward died of flu.
But you do see
all the individual cases of everybody who has Ebola. And the same happens with data. You can have a fixation on some small part of the data which is not relevant, while obscuring the great big amount of data that sits there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi Camila. First of all, I'd like to thank you for being part of this podcast.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you, how long have you been following the news about the Brazilian drought and water shortage? And do you do that on a daily basis, weekly basis? How often do you see data?
I've been following the news on a daily basis for over a year, but I've only started writing about it since October. From October to December, to the end of last year, I was writing about it on a daily basis. So I was collecting information, reading about it, processing it, trying to understand it. And this year I've started to write about it weekly, on a weekly basis. But I have to read about it every day in order to be able to write about it once a week.
Perfectly. How frequently does that data that you come across every day while reading about it is presented in graphs?
Well, some vehicles are known for their infographics, right? So what happens is, whenever we're dealing with the levels of the reservoirs, there are usually graphs that follow it. So there are usually 2 types of graphs and charts, I guess. The graphs that try to explain how the system actually works, so how the reservoirs are connected through canals and stuff like that. So those are kind of like are slightly easier to follow. And then there are the charts that try to indicate the levels of the reservoirs. Like those are the 2 situations I find them graphically represented.
Perfect. Do you filter any information? And if you do, when did you first realize that you had to do it?
Well, I've done it from the very beginning of starting to read information on the drought and the water crisis and the water shortages, because what happens is the state-run utility in charge of delivering water to the São Paulo metropolitan region, they use a system to estimate the amount of water left on the reservoirs that is just simply wrong. It just doesn't make any mathematical sense. So for starters, I had to filter out the official information, not the information per se, but the way that it was presented by the state-run utility, the way that it was presented through charts. Just to give you guys an idea, the prosecutor's office have actually forced the utility to present the information in an accurate way. If you go to the company's website and if you look at the chart, on your left you have like the date 15 May 2004, and then on your right there is the information of today. And if you look at it, it's quite clear that we're in a much better situation today than we were a year before, right? There's much more water in our reservoirs, and that is just a lie. That doesn't make any sense. If you read the little words below and if you actually check the information, what happens is right now we're at minus 12% rather than those 17% that are depicted there.
Okay, just to end this, when you started following this, that information all the way to now, how did following this information on a daily basis change your way you trust the source of the information?
Sure. I have to trust the raw data provided by the government and by the state-run utility. I have to trust the raw data, but not necessarily the way that it is depicted, right? Like I just said. As for the press, I just have to filter out to ignore all vehicles which do not take what I just told you, which do not take this into consideration, right? If they say, oh, I mean, we're at 17%, look, we've got plenty of water, this just doesn't make any sense. So this has to be filtered out for sure. And what happens is, you asked me how it's changed. Nowadays, it's become quite clear that the most reliable sources of, I wouldn't say information, but of representation of this data are Facebook pages of NGOs, such as Rios e Ruas, like rivers and streets.
Yes.
They actually have an accurate chart, which indicates like level 0 of the Cantareira Reservoir, which is our main system here in the metropolitan region.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for being part of this and taking your time. Okay?
Sure, no problem at all.
Bye.
I'm glad to be of help. Bye, Guilherme.
Jason, Gil, you both heard Andrew Darby, you heard Camilla. What are your takes on their views?
Well, there's one point that Andrew Darby made about how people should be more sceptical about reading the data provided to them. And it comes back to the point that Camilla made as well, or what Camilla's doing. She's taking the data into her own hands and then she's representing it in a fair way.
Yeah.
She says she's filtering out all the data which is misrepresented and then just showing the truth from the data.
Yeah.
That was such a very good point to make between the two interviews. Camilla said that the prosecutor's office had to legally oblige the water company to provide data in a real, understandable, in a way that people can understand. And that, for me, matches perfectly with Andrew's line that we should be more skeptical about the way we see data.
Yeah.
And I think we can put that forward to a lot of graphical representation, even in peer-reviewed journals, and even in science, and not only to the general audience, but even for scientific communication. And that is a brilliant takeaway point from both interviews.
Okay. Well, you've heard from both of them, you've heard from Andrew, you've heard from Camilla. Graphs are very important, but you have to view it with some skepticism, and then you'll be able to take out what is important. Thank you.